I lost 3 years of my life and nearly destroyed my career because I couldn't recognize the toxic people around me. One friend sabotaged my biggest opportunity while smiling to my face. Another systematically undermined my confidence until I couldn't make decisions without approval. By the time I realized what was happening, I had lost $78,000 in potential income and was taking anxiety medication just to function. The 7 toxic personalities I'm about to show you exist in everyone's life, but most people never identify them until the damage is done. Don't make my mistake. Have you ever woken up one morning and suddenly realized you've been living someone else's version of your life? That's what happened to me 3 years into my career spiral. The realization didn't come as a gentle epiphany. It hit me like a freight train in my therapist's office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting there clutching my coffee cup like a lifeline, explaining why I'd missed a major deadline that cost me a client worth $30,000 annually. The words flowed easily because I'd rehearsed them countless times. Unreliable team members, impossible client demands, lack of resources. My perfectly crafted narrative positioned me as the victim of circumstances beyond my control. My therapist, who had patiently listened to variations of this story for months, finally asked the question that would crack the foundation of my carefully constructed reality. Who chose these people to be in your life? The silence that followed felt eternal. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. In that uncomfortable vacuum, the truth I'd been avoiding for years emerged with painful clarity. I had chosen them, all of them. I'd surrounded myself with people who reinforced my worst traits and deepest insecurities. The spoiled brat of a business partner who demanded my time, then criticized my work. The manipulator who offered help that inevitably created twice the work. The friend who convinced me to lower my rates because you're not really at that level yet. What my therapist helped me understand was that these relationships weren't random accidents. I was actively seeking them out because they allowed me to remain comfortable in my limitations. Each toxic connection served as a perfect alibi for my underachievement. Their dysfunction became my excuse. The psychological term for this is trauma bonding, forming attachments to people who create cycles of harm followed by reconciliation. Like an addict chasing a high, I'd become dependent on these dysfunctional relationships. They felt familiar, safe even, despite the damage they caused. The true cost went far beyond that $30,000 client. I was living with chronic anxiety that manifested as persistent chest tightness. I needed medication just to sleep through the night. Most devastating was the persistent feeling that success wasn't meant for someone like me, that I should settle for mediocrity because that's what I deserved. What my therapist revealed was the phenomenon psychologists call repetition compulsion, unconsciously recreating situations that mirror past traumas. I was repeatedly seeking out relationships that reinforced negative self-perceptions I'd developed years earlier. These toxic connections felt comfortable precisely because they matched my damaged self-picture. The biggest revelation wasn't identifying these toxic people. It was understanding why I kept them around. Research shows that we often unconsciously maintain relationships that align with how we see ourselves. If you believe you're unworthy of success, you'll surround yourself with people who confirm that belief. My breakthrough came when I stopped seeing myself as a victim and recognized I was a willing participant in these destructive dynamics. The emotional toll wasn't just affecting my mental health, it was directly impacting my professional trajectory. The studies show a strong correlation between relationship quality and career success. My toxic connections were literally preventing my advancement. The moment I accepted responsibility for the company I kept was the moment I gained power to change my circumstances. This wasn't about blaming myself, it was about recognizing my agency. I couldn't control others' behavior, but I could control who had access to my life and energy. Taking control of who had access to my energy revealed a disturbing pattern I'd never noticed before. The people undermining my success weren't random. They operated from distinct behavioral blueprints that appeared again and again under different names and faces. What if the greatest threat to your success isn't your competition, but the people sitting across from you at dinner tonight. Let me introduce you to the 7 toxic archetypes that nearly destroyed everything I'd worked for. Understanding their patterns became my roadmap to freedom. The first archetype I identified was the spoiled brat, the person whose sense of entitlement pervades every interaction. For me, this was James, a childhood friend who'd become my business partner. His upbringing, where he faced zero consequences for his actions, created an adult who expected royal treatment in professional settings. The warning signs were there from the beginning, but I dismissed them as just James being James. When we landed our biggest client, James demanded to lead the project despite lacking basic qualifications. When I hesitated, pointing out that his inexperience could jeopardize the relationship, he threw a full-blown tantrum. "If I don't get to lead this, I'm walking away from everything," he threatened, creating an unnecessary crisis just days before our deadline. I relented, only to spend twice the hours fixing his mistakes while he took full credit for the work. The second archetype was the toxic bully who weaponizes mood swings. Sarah appeared supportive in team meetings, but would systematically undermine my confidence in private. "Are you sure you're ready for this level of responsibility?" she'd ask with feigned concern. What made her particularly dangerous was how her relationships were entirely self-referential. Every person existed solely to serve her needs. Her unpredictable anger became a tool of manipulation, creating an atmosphere where everyone walked on eggshells to avoid triggering her next outburst. The third archetype, the perpetual victim, appeared in my life as a colleague who drained everyone's emotional resources with constant crises she refused to solve. Every conversation became about her problems, leaving me emotionally depleted after each interaction. The exhausting pattern was always the same: crisis, sympathy, no action, repeat. What made this archetype so insidious was how refusing to help made me feel guilty, even though my support never led to actual improvement. The fourth toxic personality was the narcissistic controller, initially charming and seemingly invested in my success. This archetype revealed their true nature only when their needs weren't met. My client Marcus exemplified this pattern, effusive with praise when I prioritized his projects, but manipulative and demanding the moment I established boundaries. His charm masked his true intention, forming relationships based solely on what he could extract from others. The moment I no longer served his purposes, his warmth disappeared entirely. Perhaps most frustrating was the fifth archetype, the passive-aggressive saboteur. Rather than express opposition directly, this person would agree to deadlines they never intended to meet, creating additional work and stress for everyone else. My collaborator, Jen, would enthusiastically commit to project timelines, then systematically miss every milestone while offering elaborate excuses. Her indirect resistance undermined our entire team, yet was difficult to address because she never openly refused anything. The remaining 2 archetypes, the envious underminer and the chaos creator, completed the toxic ecosystem I'd built around myself. The former quietly sabotaged any success I achieved, while the latter manufactured drama to avoid accountability. What shocked me most wasn't just identifying these patterns, but recognizing that I'd been encountering the same toxic archetypes my entire life, just with different faces. These weren't random personality conflicts, they were predictable behavioral systems I could learn to spot within the first few interactions. Removing these toxic influences created immediate space for growth. Within 6 months of cutting ties with James and Sarah, my income doubled as I finally attracted clients and collaborators who operated with integrity and mutual respect. Even more significantly, the persistent knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for years began to dissolve. For the first time, I could see how these relationships had been the true source of my stagnation. After mapping all 7 toxic archetypes, I realized the most dangerous person in my life was staring back at me in the mirror. It wasn't James or Sarah who forced me to accept mediocrity. It was the version of myself convinced I didn't deserve better. The research is clear. Your social circle directly impacts your growth trajectory. Those with supportive networks consistently achieve more, and report higher life satisfaction. This isn't motivational fluff, it's psychological reality. Your transformation begins with a single decision, recognizing that your life's quality directly reflects the relationships you're willing to demand. Every toxic person you remove creates space for someone who elevates you. Every boundary you establish rewires your self-worth. The choice before you is stark but simple. Continue enabling the people who reinforce your limitations, or create the necessary vacuum for your potential to expand. Your future self is waiting on the other side of that decision.